Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Schenectady City Council Committee meeting for Monday, March 15, 2021 to order. I will go straight into government operations. Ms. Porterfield.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to call to order government operations. There's one item on the agenda. Award bidding and contract for the spring demolition 2021. Is Ms. Diat on the line? Kristen Diat, is she here?
No,
she's not, Madam Chair. I can address that. We're submitting for your consideration tonight demolition of 4 properties on the base bid. Again, these are ones that have been identified as the worst of the worst. Again, asking the council to award this project to Jackson Demolition.
Okay, I understand there were 6 bid submissions, Mr. Mayor, and this was the winning bid?
Correct. It's the lowest responsible bidder, yes.
All right. Are there any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. If there's nothing else to come, you're welcome, Mayor. If there's nothing else to come before government operations, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.
I'd like to call the Health and Recreation Committee to order, and we have one item on the agenda, and that is to talk about the fees for this season at the municipal golf course. Mr. Wolin, could you talk with us about that?
I could, but I'm actually going to pass it over to Matt. Matt's going to take it for me.
Hi, Matt. I didn't see you were on.
Hi, everybody. Nice to hear your voices. Real quick, the golf course is just putting forth a modest rate increase. We met with our golf advisory committee last week, and we've decided, well, it was proposed by the committee they would like to have the 18-hole rounds increase $2 and our season passes increase $50. It should be noted to all of you that our 2 municipal neighbors, Capitol Hills and Town of Colony, are raising their fees incrementally. Town of Colony is going $2 across the board for every rate that they have, and Capitol Hills has raised their fees $10. I don't know what projects they have slated, if they have any at all, but we do have some that we're trying to fund going forward, and so putting this rate increase in place will help to fulfill that.
Okay, thanks. So are there any questions from anyone?
Yes, Ms. Patrick.
Ms. Porterfield.
So could you tell me, Mr. Daly, you said that you have a couple things in plan. Can you just give us a little bit more detail on that?
Sure. We're always looking to try ways to get our irrigation system. It's aging pretty badly. It's always in need of work. We have talked to Mr. Ferrari about this in past years and how we're going to fund this. And he specifically said that in order to put a new irrigation system in place, we need to incrementally raise our fees over the next 5 to 6 years. So we're trying to go in place of that. And listen, I understand that times are tough right now. We all do. We're just trying to get ourselves in place, in a good financial place going forward, so that when the time comes, we have money to spend on it. We also have some other areas on the golf course, tree removal that's always needing to be looked upon, some tee boxes that need updating. So there's always projects that need to go forward, and we don't want to burden the city with finance, so we try to fund these projects ourselves.
Thank you.
Other questions?
That answered your question.
Definitely.
Ms. Patrick.
Yes, Ms. ZW.
So, Matt, first of all, I want to commend you on always putting a good presentation together. You and Chris always do a great job. And I'm happy to see that, that we're doing this in an incremental manner. What do you anticipate, you know, you're looking at this year, I'm assuming that you're anticipating to increase again next year. Is this going to be a systematic increase every year? Is that what you're looking to get accomplished?
Pretty much. I mean, obviously with the mayor's guidance, our advisory committee, with Anthony Ferrari, Chris Wallen, we all kind of put these studies together every year where we need to be. So in order to fund these projects accordingly, we got to make sure that the only way that we're going to get funding for it is to obviously raise our rates. So, you know, obviously we don't want to price gouge anybody either. So we try to do as best a job as we can to compare our facility to what other facilities are doing. So in other words, say Town of Colony, they might be raising their fees, but what are they doing on their golf course to answer those questions? And for us, we always have evidence that shows the customers that we're putting a good faith effort to put best possible product out there. I can't say for sure what these other golf courses are doing just that. I mean, all I can do is pay attention to what we're doing, but I can tell you right now, our play has tenfold over the years, specifically because of what we're doing there. So this is just going to help that.
I completely agree, and I commend you because I do hear fabulous things about the course. So I'm sure that this minimal increase is not going to hurt anything at all. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to second. I mean, I think these projects are very important. We talked about them last year, and I'm also glad that we're doing it incrementally, but I think especially the irrigation piece. But all I hear about is how great our course is compared to a lot of other courses locally, even some of the private ones. So I really appreciate all the work that you do, Matt, and all the work of our advisory committee as well. So thanks for that. Does anybody have any other questions?
I move this.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'd like to motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks.
I'll call to order the Public Service and Utilities Committee. The only item on the agenda is the public hearing, which was held on March 8th on the acceptance of the ownership for North End Drive. Were there any comments or questions? And I will seek a motion. You're muted, Carmel.
Sorry about that. I just realized it was me. I'll make a motion.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you. Call to order public safety. The first item is discussion regarding the police reform and reinvention collaborative. Mayor McCarthy, would you like to give us a summary before I hand over to City Council members for their input?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. I want to first thank the City Council for their following this, their participation in it. And again, the broad-based community engagement that we had throughout this whole process in implementing the governor's executive order. The steering committee was broad-based within the community. It's you know, a time nationally where we have seen just some horrendous things in policing, and those events are unfortunate. They're terrible, and it's brought to a head so many things where people look at policing where they've done things and been deficient, where racism may exist, unequal delivery of services, and we want to make sure that Schenectady is leading in our ability to provide policing at a level where people respect it, they are confident in the performance of our officers. And some of the fundamental things where I think Schenectady is ahead of the curve in this, and you know, spent 30 years in the DA's office, worked on some of the higher profile cases, which resulted in a number of police officers going to state prison. Most of them were out of the ranks of the city department, so I've seen the worst of the worst. We had a terrible record here, and I always reflect that most of those things were self-inflicted. We spent roughly a decade after Wayne Bennett was brought in here looking to change some of the disciplinary process. You have to remember, there were a lot of times we thought of not pursuing that. It went to Supreme Court, went to the Appellate Division, went up to the Court of Appeals. And we have in place today the Commissioner form of discipline. You have to remember, we do not have civilian oversight within the police department. We have civilian control. I was fortunate to have Wayne Bennett as the commissioner when I first came in here. Mike Idens served with distinction. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to reach out and recruit an individual whose resume is very impressive and his experience is broad-based, in having Commissioner Devine serve in that position today. And the only thing in this process that we probably didn't spend enough time on is that Commissioner form of discipline, where it is, again, much more results-oriented, much more open than anything in the past. And is we're looking with the Police Community Review Board to have that as a complementary civilian involvement. Again, the council has to be cognizant of the commissioner's role, and how do we build on that success in the actual record that we have in place. You have before you a number of recommendations. There was a lot of time and effort put in this. Again, I don't look at this proposal as kind of the be-all, end-all. I'm going to ask the council to also consider that. We're under a time deadline imposed on us by the governor in his executive order to implement these recommendations and submit them to, I shouldn't say implement them, but to submit the recommendations to the state and then to look to implement them going forward. We have to get the report in under the governor's request and directive. The implementation of it in this actual process, I look at as more of a dynamic situation where we're looking at the things that we do well, the things that need to be improved on. How do we deliver services across the community in a manner that is fair, it's equitable, that people, again, have confidence in our police officers, and for that matter, all public employees. And so what we've submitted to you tonight submitted to you tonight for your consideration is a starting point or a continuation in some of the transformation that's happened within the department. And so I ask your favorable consideration for this, but also ask for your partnership going forward to be able to, again, address the needs of the community, to do it not only from policing, but there's areas of poverty, things within the school district that we should collectively work on so the community is stronger, better, and more sustainable. And I know there's a number of emails that went out today that are continuing to go out talking about the 13 demands, which Chief Clifford and the command staff addressed early on when they were first put out. And you have to look at those responses that the department put there. People submit that to the council like that we haven't done anything with the 13 demands. There have been some changes that we've made in house. There are things that were problems that really didn't exist. They used the hog tie issue, that it was really not permitted under the rules, even though it didn't specifically delineate that. The chief in the last round modified the wording so that we're addressing hog tying, even though there's nobody in the police department can ever remember a situation where it was ever used. There's other elements that are beyond the control of myself, the commissioner, the police department. They're things that are dealt with by the district attorney's office, the sheriff's office, other components of the law enforcement community. And some members of the commission have asked, that we advocate for some other changes. Again, I'm not opposed to looking at some of those. There have not been any specific requests asking, the city council to do a resolution in support of some things, asking me to do something in support of it. And I don't want to downplay the importance of the 13 demands or the efforts that was put in the community to bring those forward. But you also have to remember that they are some things that are false narratives where they're not specific problems. Some things are beyond the control of myself, the city council, the chief, and we shouldn't get sidetracked and not look at the collective involvement that we have to be able to move this community forward, to make, again, where we're talking about the police department in this particular area, make it better and stronger. We want those things for all the city departments, whether it's the fire department, whether it's our code enforcement, any services that we deliver. And with that, I won't go on any longer, but the command staff is available, the commissioners on this call, so that if there are questions or things that we can add for the discussion, the staff is ready to provide that to the council. And again, I look forward to working with you as we go forward over the next year to again make the department stronger, better, and more responsive to the needs of the people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor McCarthy. Chief Clifford, would you like to summarize anything before we go into the reports? Or Commissioner Devine?
I'm 100% behind what the mayor has said, and just by way, I know I haven't met everybody, but it's important to note, I think, that I've been involved in indigent criminal defense since 1971. And this is 50 years now since I started in the public defender's office in Albany. And I told the chief when I first started here that having been away from it and sitting on the bench for 15 years, I had been removed from things that go on at the street level. And I was astounded. And that's not to say there isn't more that can and should be done. But I was astounded at how much had been done prior to the recent events over the last year and the movement towards police reform. So I mean, I know I'm probably somewhat biased, but just looking at the things the mayor and the chief and the council have done, I think we are light years ahead of many other cities. And that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you. Chief Clifford, anything from your side?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just briefly, I would just like to say that I'm very proud of the work that our collaborative has done on this report. You know, we've come up with 24 recommendations, and I think it's just fair to say that, to point out that the executive order specifically states, and I feel that we've complied with it, that our job here was to conduct a comprehensive review of current police department deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices, and to develop a plan to improve such deployments, strategies, policies, procedures, and practices for the purposes of addressing the particular needs of the communities served by the police agency and promote community engagement to foster trust, fairness, and legitimacy, and to address any racial bias and disproportionate policing of communities of color. And that is what we aim to do with this collaborative. We weren't necessarily doing studies to determine if those things were happening. That could be a separate discussion and study. But our job was tasked to look at all of the police department, the entire structure of the police department, to review policies and create a plan to adopt and implement the recommendations resulting from that review and consultation. And the plan was to seek to reduce any racial disparities in policing. And I feel that the 24 recommendations that we've come forward with do that. And you know, it is a commitment that we're not done here. We're going to continuously reflect on what we do here. But I am proud of what we've done. Thank you for your time, and we will be open for any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Chief. So my colleagues, I'm going to go through each section so that we cover individual sections. I will open for questions from my colleagues. That way we can able to get through this report in a timely manner. So we'll open for discussion with my colleagues, and we can start with the first section, or the recommendation.
Mr. Mudavaren, do you want our questions now or as we go, or?
As we go, as I scroll the page, we'll address any question that we have on each section.
Okay.
So that way, if changes need to be made, Ms. Michael can able to address that and put those in order.
Well,
Would you like to proceed?
I'm trying to look. I have 4 areas that I'm interested. I have some questions in, but I'm trying to see if I'm on those pages yet.
If you identify the section, I can scroll to that section.
The four areas in which I have questions, one is communication, one is recruitment and hiring, one is mental health, and one is community policing. So I can ask them as we go along.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mudavaren,
Go ahead, please.
my question is around transparency, and I'm not quite sure what section that would be in.
So go ahead, speak.
Well, I mean, I know this is the beginning of our process. This is not the end. This is where we're starting. I know that this has a time frame on it, but you know, my question is, you know, I want to know what steps are going to be taken to ensure that there is transparency in the policing of the city, and how that is going to look going forward.
That is displayed on my screen, number 22. Thank you, Chief.
Just to answer that question, transparency is something that we're committed to, and we addressed it in the recommendation of number 22. You know, we want to get better at explaining what we do and how we do it. You know, our first venture there was to voluntarily seek out and obtain a grant for body-worn cameras, which we did 3 years ago. Yes. Through the application process. Even before body-worn cameras, we were one of the first in the areas to have in-car videos, and you know, we have been working internally here on creating a platform that we could share more of our data online. Once we get that platform created, it is time-consuming. It would be expensive to hire out, so we're doing it internally, and we want to have we do want to be more transparent with the data that we have. And all of the reports that we generate internally, so that we can share them with the public. So that's our recommendation on a commitment there. And of course, building our website platform in order to do that is going to be something that we look forward to doing during this year.
If I could just expound on that, Chief Seaver here, even as today, I actually worked on it a little bit with some staff here. I'm researching some platforms that we could, software platforms that we have. I'll use some of the other PDs in New York State actually posting a lot of their records, posting a lot of their statistics, reports. We as a city receive thousands and thousands of FOIL requests every year. So if we can actually, this serves two purposes. Obviously be transparent, but also expedite the FOIL process. And obviously we'd redact things as law permits. But again, just to have as much posted on through our website as possible for the transparency of all records.
Thank you.
Mr. Motivair?
Go ahead, Mr. Palmini.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, probably about 4 or 5. The first one's center around officer training. What specific steps can you use to make sure that if there is any racism in our city's police force, you can root it out, and to make sure there's zero tolerance for officers who express or act on racist sentiments?
Well, I guess we'll start off by saying that our pre-employment background checks are pretty thorough, and we'd like to think that the officers that we're bringing on boarding, will not bring that with them to this department. And then I go back to the body worn cameras, and that we're monitoring everything that our officers are doing, and not only is that being reflective upon what the officers are doing out in the field when there's a complaint made, but we also proactively do quality control reviews of the work that they do. So randomly, supervisors will pull incident calls that they're on and review them, and then write an assessment on that and forward it to the officer. And this is more for constructive criticism, trying to find areas for improvements. So those are things that we're doing to manage from within. And of course, should anything come forward to us in the form of a complaint, it goes to our Office of Professional Standards, which we do a thorough investigation and review on. And if any officer was deemed to be, in violation of any of our policies, which would cover anything along those lines, they would be held accountable, both to myself, their bureau chiefs, and of course the commissioner and the mayor.
Again, if I can expound real quick, we use technology in this area as well. The old cliche, you respond the way you're trained. We put out more training bulletins now than ever. We have a Lexapol server, which is part of our policies. Every month we put out between 10 and 20, we call them daily training bulletins, and they're all real case scenarios with how you respond with policy and so forth. We also partner with our insurance company over the past couple of years to do similar trainings as well that are online for the officers. I guess my point is, before we used to offer 40 hours of in-service training a year. Now we probably do 40 hours just online, and there's no extra cost to the department. So I just wanted to say we're using technology, which we can also blend into any bias trainings we have and so forth that are part of this reform, and we're constantly looking at that. So.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to point out here is that our analysis unit is very good, and we regularly run reports on what our officers are doing proactively. And I guess an example of our internal controls that we have that has come to benefit us is that I think it was 2 years ago when the New York Civil Liberties Union put a report out that was incorrect. And it impacted us negatively. It made us look bad, and we were able to put out our data and our information very quickly because we had that showed that it was incorrect. So we do have internal controls. We're monitoring what officers are doing on a proactive level, so that we can make sure that there are not any racial disparities in the way that we're policing. So we are doing those regularly at the command level. And we hope to, as we build up our databases and our ability to collect data, be able to do more of those reports with less effort from our analysts, so that we can monitor them more regularly.
I guess my next question, I think, builds on that. Could you speak to discriminatory or bias-based stops, searches, and arrests, and the policies that you have in place about those?
Yeah, we have specific policies for that. I just want to kind of, we have no quotas, we have no enforcements that are geared toward, other than if you see a violation. So I guess the short answer here is we have some policies that address it, which are posted online. It's biases in policing, and then we also we do not sanction or condone any type of quota numbers or anything like that. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but
how, I guess related to that, how is video used in that? Is that actively used? Is what's the process in regards to that?
yeah, as the chief stated before, we have a basically quality control checks by every sergeant, every supervisor is required every month to do a number of quality control checks and checking for stuff, any biases, obviously, or any violations of policy is very broad. Any violations at all that they flag, and this, again, that's proactive. It's not based upon a complaint. It's based upon the officer's observations. They also go on calls that the officers are on to see firsthand how to respond. So it's almost a constant quality check of their work. We instill in our sergeants to take care of the small stuff so they don't grow into bigger problems. And I think we've become very, very good at that, over time. As the mayor had said before, I've been here 33 years, 23 years as assistant chief this year. But it's just, so we've seen the change. And right now, I think we have the strongest, in my personal opinion, the strongest supervision that we've ever had since I've been here in the police department. So I want to kind of put that out there, because it's the officers are so ethical, and there are so many things that they do right, and they're so caring, and they want to do the right thing. So again, we're sitting here trying to instill further changes, but we have made a lot of changes as well. And I also want to say this is one of the most receptive command staffs I've ever been part of with the public. I just want to reassure the public, these meetings have been very eye-opening for all of us, and me in particular, being here so long, that we welcome them. We will make change. We just cannot rush change. We spent the last 3-4 years writing 172 new policies within this department, and that's important to note, because we feel our policies are very up to date. I'm not saying they can't use modifications, but they're not old policies that we're sitting here hanging our hats on. So just kind of get that out there.
Yeah. And I can say that when it comes to bias-based stops or searches or arrests, the camera systems we're using, the officers are required by policy to turn them on. And when they turn them on, they always go backwards 30 seconds, I believe it is. So, unless there's a malfunction with the device itself, it's going to capture whatever the infraction is and the reason for the officer making the stop. So, sergeants sign off on all arrests when they're made, and if there's anything that would indicate that that video needs to be reviewed, they do it. And if there's ever a complaint made, of course, our office professional standards will review the video. And many times there's 2 video views, both the car and on the body. So we have systems in place to protect against that. And of course, any officer who's possibly making too many stops that might catch the sergeant's attention, they'll look at closely and monitor that they're not being biased in how they're doing things.
And if I can just go back on transparency, the body cameras, important to note that 3.5 years ago, when we decided to go into body cameras, there were no political pressures at that time to do that. This was something that the command staff decided that was in the best interest of the department, the best interest of the city. I also want to say there's no resistance from the collective bargaining unit to resist cameras. So as far as transparency, we're trying to be as transparent as possible. So I just kind of back up the other questions. So.
And I have 3 more questions, if that's okay. Could you talk about the the use and policies of SWAT teams and no-knock warrants?
Yes. We do utilize no-knock warrants primarily for high-risk warrant service and primarily for narcotics or gun-related search warrants. We utilize dynamic entries in those situations to maintain an element of surprise. We want to prevent the occupants of the house from either making a bad decision that escalates the situation or give them an opportunity to obtain a weapon. We want to avoid a barricaded subject situation or a hostage situation. We want to immediately secure all the occupants before matters can escalate. So we consider no-knock warrants to be essential as a matter of officer safety.
All right. One of the things that came out, and Dr. McLean sent out a report earlier today, and going through the data, one of the things that popped out was some of the disparities, in particular with regards to trust of the police force. So what strategies do you have that you might use to try to reduce these disparities and to build trust in the community?
Well, one of the reasons why we created the Office of Neighborhood Engagement that Lieutenant Masheron and Sergeant Mannix are running is that we are making a conscious effort to be out in the community, speaking with members of the community, engaging with them, trying to foster cooperation so that they help us police their neighborhoods, and so that's really the main thing that we're doing, trying to build trust and fairness and legitimacy within our communities. The other thing is that, and we've tried to make a conscious effort to promote it when possible, is that the fact that we're holding officers accountable when mistakes are made from a discipline level, that means that they're not going out there and doing things in the community without any repercussions. So maintaining that accountability at the level of the officers is something that's very important to this command staff, and we're doing it in such a way that when we promote procedural justice, we do it internally and externally, and we're asking officers to go out there and treat the community just like they would be treated internally here. Dignity and respect is the main thing. Treat people like they want to be treated out in the community. Give them a voice. Convey trustworthy motives. So these are things that we're constantly talking about internally, and demonstrating that they, if they go out into the community and they're not holding those values with every contact they made in the community, they are held accountable.
And my last question, I think, is something that we as a city need to do a much better job at getting this information out there, is related to, and the mayor spoke about this briefly earlier, is related to misconduct, but the role of the public safety commissioner. Maybe you and the commissioner, maybe you could both speak on this, because I do think this is one of the areas where a lot of people really don't know about, and there's quite a fair bit of confusion on.
All right, maybe Commissioner, what I'll do is I can talk about the process up to the point where you're involved, and then maybe we can pass it off to you. And full disclosure for the commissioner, in the short time that he's been here, which has been about 6 months maybe, fortunately we haven't had a process that's gone before him. So that's likely good news to hear.
They're afraid of them.
So whenever, especially if we're talking discipline that might get to the commissioner's level, and even as far as that goes, any discipline in general, it would have to be approved by him. But typically what happens is if there's an issue that we're holding an officer accountable for, it always goes through our Office of Professional Standards where an investigation is done. And that's one of the things that it's one of the tests one of the questions on the chief's tests, and it's something that they teach you in all the executive level schools that I've been to, is that before you make a decision on something, you have to get all the facts first. And that's true whether it's internally or externally, even for a crime that's committed. So once all the facts are determined, and the case file is summarized by the Office of Professional Standards, it gets sent to the bureau chief. The bureau chief reviews it, and if they're okay with it, it comes to me as the chief. I'll review it, and then if I sign off on it, at that point, I'll send it back to the bureau chief. And if there's discipline that needs to be handed down, the bureau chief decides what they want to do. And then they'll at some point consult with me about it. And we're on the same page where that discipline is going to be. And at that point, if it's going to be formal discipline, that's when charges are drawn up, which is you put the charges on paper, and which is essentially just like if you were filing a charge to go to a court. Now you're filing a charge that's going to be submitted to the Public Safety Commissioner. Once those charges are put on paper and they're filed with the commissioner, they're presented to the officer, and they're notified that they are on charges. And then the process starts, and the process is in our policies that are online that you could read. And I don't have it memorized, but there's a certain time period that has to occur where the officer has the ability to have a pre-hearing conference with the commissioner to discuss the charges. And typically they'll bring their PBA attorney, or if it's not a PBA related matter, they'll bring their private attorney in. And that's where a conference is had as to how the process is going to then proceed. And during that time period right there, the command staff will tell the officer, this is what you did wrong. This is where you failed us. This is what we would like to see as a discipline. And the officer is given that opportunity to accept it or go before the commissioner in a public hearing. If they choose to accept the discipline, then a memorandum of agreement is drawn up by the attorneys. Everybody signs it. It gets approved by the commissioner, and it's filed, and then the discipline is handed down. Should the officers decide not to, then it goes to the Public Safety Commissioner for a hearing, and that's where I'll pass it off to the commissioner to talk about, because at that point it would almost be like a judicial trial. We have never had one, so if there is one in the future, it will be the first one that we've had. But that's essentially the process right there of how discipline's handed down. There are lighter versions of discipline that don't result in charges, and that could be a letter of reprimand. And in most of those cases, instead of putting formal charges down, we just do verbal discussions with the command staff and with the commissioner that this is where this is falling, this is what we'd like to do. And then he would, of course, approve of it. And then we would just write that letter and put it in the officer's file. Commissioner?
Well, that was a pretty good recitation. I mean, basically, once it gets up to the commissioner level, what we'll do is we'll have a hearing. We'll follow the rules of procedure and due process that are required in any proceeding. And the proceeding itself is somewhat analogous to a criminal matter, wherein there'll be discussions in the nature of a plea bargain. And if that doesn't resolve the issue, that's when we'll have the full-blown trial. After the trial, and upon a finding of misconduct, As the chief said, discipline can range anywhere from a letter of reprimand all the way up to termination. And fortunately, we haven't had any in Schenectady. I've only been here a short time, so certainly I haven't had any. But I think this goes back to what the mayor said earlier. What everyone should be aware of is I am not a police officer, never been a police officer, and I am what you might call a civilian. And not only have I been engaged in criminal defense throughout my career, but run plenty of trials at the Supreme Court level and in the appellate division. And what we've done, one of the things that a good defense attorney does is review the conduct of the police officer, review the validity of the arrest to begin with. So it's an area I'm familiar with. And certainly at the appellate level, we often look at those same issues and make decisions regarding whether a conviction should stand or not. So although not a police officer, I certainly am familiar with years of experience in all those areas. And the important thing to note is that being a civilian, as the mayor said, the civilians control the process. This isn't just a review process. This is controlling the process and controlling the hearing and controlling the imposition of discipline.
Thank you.
If I could just add one more thing, I feel like we got play by play and I'm doing the add on, but the former way we did it, it was just lengthy. We had to make application to PERB and file our charges with PERB, but we could not come up with an agreement of discipline. And it was 9 months to a year and a half before we'd have a decision from PERB and get on the calendar. I just share that with you because this expedites everything. It's basically 21 to 45 day turnaround time from the time charges are put on somebody. And again, the old format would take, lengths of time. It was just ridiculous. So.
Yeah. And just
I'd just like to, if I could, add on to that a little bit. I read an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal that was sent to all of us today, and it talks about what they're trying to do in Louisville and what they're attempting to create trust in the community. And one of the things that the community looks for, and I think we should look for, is the speed with which a complaint comes to fruition and is dealt with. And as the chief just said, this process, which took a great deal of time for Schenectady to be able to implement, certainly speeds up the process, and I think we'll go towards that goal of building trust within the community.
And just so to put everything in perspective, it's been it was 3 full years from Commissioner Iden's being brought on, which is when that lawsuit was won, to the time that he ultimately left and Commissioner Devine came. And in that 3-year time period, 12 officers were put on charges and disciplined in this format. So it has been used, and we will continue to use it if it presents itself. And the what we're seeing as a trend is that officers get it. They get it. They understand that nothing's going to be. They're going to be held accountable. They understand that. So we're seeing less of a frequency now than we did in the beginning stages, and that's good news.
So,
Mr. Solomon, you complete your questions?
Yes, thank you. I think that's plenty.
Thank you. Chief, I just want to follow up a question on you spoke of a body-worn camera. Is there a plan in place in terms of the camera is shut off?
Yeah.
It's in our policy that if somebody shuts off their camera, that they will be disciplined. And within those 12 that I discussed, multiple times an officer was held accountable for something to do with their body worn camera.
Yeah, it's within our policy again to, you know, at the beginning, we had some growing pains. I wouldn't call them on purpose, but we still, addressed them early on. Our system has become pretty good now, and officers are very familiar with it. So it's, again, there's some growing pains, but no, officers would be disciplined if they turn off on purpose.
Thank you.
Mr. Mudavera?
Go ahead, please.
I just had a follow-up question in reference to, you know, you were talking about officers. How, if there's an officer that wants to submit a complaint about a fellow officer's conduct, what's the process? And is that an open, easy process for the officer to do?
You want to start?
Yeah, you know, the process for officers is the same as civilians, that if they feel that there's been something that's been done wrong, they have multiple outlets to take. They could go directly to our office professional standards. That has happened in the past. They could go to a supervisor on their shift. That's happened in the past. They could come upstairs and talk to one of their assistant, the chiefs, or myself. So we have multiple paths for them to take, and they also have their police union that many times they could go through if they have a you know, an issue that they would like to see resolved. Typically, that venue will be more towards mediation than it would actually somebody getting in trouble.
Yeah, the city has its own harassment policy. Also within the guidelines, there's other avenues they can take to file complaints outside of the police department, which is written into the city policy as well.
Mr. Mudavera?
Thank you. Please proceed.
Yes, I just wanted to actually, since we're at this point right now, I want to just kind of like maybe ask some questions based on what Mr. Palomini brought out. In terms of officer training, Assistant Chief Sieber mentioned the training that they do. What I'd like to know in terms of that, or what I want to suggest, because I don't see it anywhere in here, is that there be an evaluation of the training that the officer takes, because you can take a training online, but what is the outcome of that? How do you determine whether an individual's response comes from a biased place? So I don't see where that's addressed, and if it is addressed, you can you can point it out for me. But I really would like to see where we have some kind of mechanism where we can determine if the responses to certain things that this is showing that officer is biased in a certain way. So I know he talked about it and how do you root out racism, but if there's no mechanism to actually test that, then I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I'm just checking mic on. To me, the quality control on that is their performance, their job performance. If they didn't pay attention in class, obviously they'll stumble on the field, and then they'll be held accountable otherwise. Some of the daily training bulletins I spoke about before, there is actually a question or two at the end that they have to answer, and they have to answer it correctly in order to move on. As far as the biases, that's kind of a broad way of analyzing something. I think that's a case-by-case basis personally. But again, if a person comes to class or online training, just like in any job, if you don't pay attention and then you make mistakes, you're going to be held accountable. I don't know right now. I can't sit here and think of anything that we have as far as at the end of the day when they receive this training. We do ask for feedback. We do have lesson plans in place that would, the instructors that must follow. Some of them are followed by DCGS certifications. Others are, we bring over in the law department or DA's office every year and get legal updates and so forth. So we put out right now more training than ever, but I don't know if I can directly answer that question as far as biases, recognize them other than individual cases when they show some bias.
Yeah, that might be something that we might need some help with, at least having a discussion with, but we certainly would write it down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, because definitely there's methods of that you can do that with. And so I have a further question in terms of that. It's so looking at your administrative staff, it's not extremely diverse, the upper level. So how is it when you come up with, let's see, ways to deter, I think that, let me just say this, how you see it depends on where you sit. And so we all know why we're here today, because of, you know, policing in communities of color. So if you have a command staff that's working on this particular thing, but there's no reflection in that staff of people of color, how do you work through that to identify that this may be a bias, that may be sitting, because you sit in a different place, you don't see that. So I'd like to know how you address that. I do have a recommendation, but I'd like to know how that's addressed, and then
If I can go first on this, I've spent many, prior to tests, like a year before we're gonna give a test, generally go out and do some recruitment within and then the schools and the neighborhoods and so forth. The short answer is, it's getting at the grassroots, the entry-level officers to have a broad range of Black, brown, females, Hispanics, every they can have, that way up the chain, that it'll be promoted along at the same time. Because it takes your experience and your test and your civil service ability to take these tests. All that kind of plays into the determining factor. You know, we are open for suggestions there, because I personally have gone to the schools in New Albany and SEC and Union College, and I've gone to churches before, and we brought a diverse representation of the police department with me. Again, I did personally a couple of different years that we were given tests, and I didn't see the successes that we would hope for. So,
okay, so maybe I should clarify, because I'm not asking about recruitment right now. What I am saying is that the current staff as it sits, because that's what we have to deal with right now, the command staff, there is not a great, I don't know if there's any diversity, quite frankly, at the upper level as I think through that. So what I'm asking is, how do you may not see something. I know you say we sit down and talk to officers if we think there's bias, but because there's no diversity, let me just give you my recommendation. I'd like to recommend that you have some type of peer review process, so that officers who are more diverse than the command staff, if something comes up, you have that kind of process in place. I didn't see it anywhere in any of the recommendations, but you know, if we're talking about trying to police communities of color as much as possible, we have to make sure that that lens is at the table when we're considering something that you may not think is bias or discrimination, but someone who is from a different group or different ethnic group, to be specific, may think that. So I'm asking, how do you look at it right now? Not how do we recruit people for the future? And again, my recommendation is that there be some type of peer review process, because I thought today what we were going to do is look at what was given and then give our recommendations on that. I didn't want to like keep hashing it out further and ask questions about what's in here, but rather give recommendations which I think need to be in there. That's how I understood today.
If I could just comment I understood what you were asking as a question, and I can tell you that throughout this process, I've done my best to seek out conversations with multiple people specific to this department, who maybe have different perspectives, and I'll just tell you who I've spoken to, really, so that I could say that I felt like I've been getting a good sense of where we are as a department. And I've had long conversations multiple times with Sergeant Linier, and he's been a part of our command staff here. He hasn't been at every meeting, but he's been at many of them. I've had regular conversations with retired chief chairs about both his time when he was the chief, and now he's a professor, so he's got a different perspective that we have, that we talk about different things. And I've had conversations, and we've invited other officers like Officer Plowden, and one of our civilian traffic supervisors, Cheryl Harris. So we've brought different perspectives to our command staff. While the command staff might not be the most diverse, we've tried our best to bring officers and civilians that work here into the conversations during this process.
So specifically, if an officer we're finished this and we've put our recommendation in. If an officer is accused of treating someone in a discriminate against someone based on their ethnicity, if that happens, what I'm saying is I'm recommending a process, not that's part of this, but a process when that happens, who comes to the table to discuss that and review that. That's what I'm saying. If I'm recommending there be some type of peer review process that includes someone who may see it differently because of their own personal ethnic background. Because we see it differently. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. You know, we've had conversations throughout this that policing looks different in communities of color. So I'm simply saying that if we're considering someone who's being brought forward and there's and the civilian is saying, hey, this person discriminated against me based on my particular ethnic group, as we're reviewing that, there needs to be someone else, there needs to be a diverse group of people reviewing that, considering that within the Office of Professional Standards or wherever you would do that. So to me, there needs to be some kind of peer review process. I'm trying to work around the fact that we don't have a lot of diversity right now. But how do we address that and make sure that people look through it through more than one lens? That's my recommendation. And I'll actually submit that and put that in writing so that there be some type of peer review process in those situations.
Understood. And I do understand what you're saying, and I agree with it.
Ms. Porterfield, are you completed with your questions?
I thought we were going point by point because we kind of got off track. So I can wait until we get to.
We went all over the place, so I will ask you to just complete.
But I can stay in order so that we're going in order. I can stay in order.
Proceed with your question.
Okay. All right, so I gotta flip my page. So actually, in mine are not questions. It's more of recommendations. Again, I thought that's what we're supposed to look at what's happening and move forward. So under the category, and it talks about where you're going to have community conversations, regular conversations hosted by the police department. I thought that in our steering committee meeting, we said that that would not be hosted by the police department, but rather be hosted by the community, and the police department would be present. Did I misinterpret that? What was said at that meeting?
Which?
I think it's not, I think from that topic, it's not one or the other, but I think what we're recommending is that we'll do both.
So that, okay, because this doesn't include the other of having the community do conversations. It specifically says hosted by the police department. So if we're going to do both, I think that needs to be in there as well.
But if the community is going to host the meetings, all right, we can put in there that if invited, we'll show up.
Well, I mean, I think I don't want to change what the committee already agreed on. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But I am trying to make sure that we are getting in what was agreed on during that meeting. And as I understood, 2 people stepped up to actually said they would organize hosting the meetings. And I'm seeing here that it's that the hosting is by the police department. So that's what I wanted to clarify.
It's number 16, I think, if that helps.
And
It is, yeah, number 6 is.
Number 19, right?
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, there it is. No, yeah, 19, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Mayor, please proceed.
Thank you. Councilmember Porterfield, I agree with the premise you're talking about where we want to have that open. Some of the other side of it is I would still like to get more people in the police station to see what the officers are doing. I say the police station, it's whether, we offered ride-alongs to the steering committee, and I think we had one person who took advantage of it who was not on the steering committee. I want people to, see what they do every day, see some of the equipment, have a better understanding of it. It's not only policing, but the fire department, some of the things that are out there, some of the things we're doing with telemedicine. And so where somebody else may host it, but I'd still like things that happen maybe within the police station, even though sometimes discussions, you know, whether they're in a church, a school building, other ones, it has a slightly different atmosphere, but I don't want people to be afraid to come to the police station. I don't want them to feel that there's a dividing line there. And I know that that does exist today. And how do we work to break that down so that people feel as equals and that they can reach out where I always say I want police officers and public employees to be viewed as community leaders so that people can look up to them, respect them, and trust them.
Well, you kind of had a question in there, and I think one of the ways we do it is not make sure that all the meetings are not hosted in the police department. I think it's people should come there, because I definitely suggested that we make sure that we re-implement the Civilian Police Academy. I think it was a wonderful program. It really let people see it from the eyes of how the police see they're doing their day-to-day work, just as much as we want the police to try to see through the lens of the community. I believe it should go the other way as well, which is why I suggested the Civilian Police Academy happen, and that would happen in the police department, much of it. But in terms of the community meetings, I do think that having those hosted, some of those at least, hosted within the community is what we agreed on, and I think would be a lot more beneficial.
I'm not disputing that, but just I think some people are afraid sometimes of the police department, and how do we help break some of that down?
Wow, but we probably can't solve that today.
Okay, we'll wait till tomorrow.
All right. So, so definitely, I think we just definitely need to make sure that we have that they're hosted in the community as well. And also, we talked about having that you would have police officers be trained in cultural sensitivity. So I'd asked this question before, and I want to just reiterate that I'm suggesting that all officers receive the training, not just specific officers who are going to be involved in community engagement. I think community outreach, I think we passed by it. I think it went down, but just not the officers who are involved in community outreach or community engagement. I would recommend that all officers receive this training. And additionally, I said that I would like to see that happen at Zone 5. And Assistant Chief Sieber said there is some type of, I believe it was the Assistant Chief or someone in the back that was also in the room at the time, said there is some type of training that is being done. I did ask to see what that training looked like. I have not seen that yet, but I think it's important that we start this cultural sensitivity training and anti-racism training, all the trainings that we're going to do at the point where people actually start their career at the police department. So that is my recommendation, that it not just current staff, but staff that's coming on at the very beginning, along with all the other training that they're receiving. So that's my recommendation on that. In terms of the Civilian Police Review Board, I know, let me just go all the way to the end. It's hard to read that document, so let me just, I see that, okay. Oh, 1 second, let me get there. All right, so the recommendation for the Civilian Police Review Board was really, a lot of it was about the civilian CPRB doing more outreach to the community and developing community relations, which I 100% agree with. But additionally, it was, let's see, I would like to, okay, I just like to somewhere add the language that it says, what I have here, the Schenectady Police Department is committing to working with the Civilian Police Review Board and to working closely with the Board of Education and Outreach, the Board on Education and Outreach. But I think that we need to specifically refer to chapter 93 in here, which governs this particular entity, and you refer to chapter 93 of the city code. I think that we need to add some language so that they know that this is actually a part of the city code and not just an entity that is under the police department. I think it's important to put that language in there. Under use of force, I see that there's a recommendation that the name be changed from use of force to response to resistance report. And I have to tell you that I totally disagree with the name change, because use of force is that, you know, the force of use of force is by the police officer. To change that, response to resistance then puts the onus on the person who's being detained, arrested, or whatever. So I feel like it's putting, it's automatically saying that, you know, that this is this person's fault by changing it response to resistance report. So, and use of force is a common term that's used throughout policing. And so as a police department, I think that we should remain with the common term. And again, it doesn't, the name change just puts too much of the onus on the person who is being, I don't want to call them a suspect, but I know that's the term that's used, but the person that's being having a discussion with, or being pulled over, or being stopped, or whatever it is. So I don't agree with the recommendation of the name change for those reasons, especially since use of force is a universal term and one that people are familiar with. All right. And for the community engagement officers, it says that you would use officers who were specialized, who were trained in areas of harm reduction, homelessness, mental health. I would suggest that we either do one of two things. I would first suggest, if possible, that we could use civilians who are trained in those areas. I don't mean just, you know, the guy from down the block, but people from agencies or organizations who deal with this type of thing on a regular basis. I think it puts more stress on our police officers to have to add additional thing to what they have to learn how to engage. And it takes a specific skill set to deal with people who are already in situations where their life is not at the best it's ever been. So I would suggest that we could use civilians who are trained, different agencies and organizations in that, as opposed to just hiring more officers to address that. And if we're going to use officers, I would suggest that the officers not be in uniform, because we know part of what the concern is that intensifies in people who are engaging with the police is the presence of their uniform. And so, you know, just increases the intensity of the situation and sometimes the anxiety of the person that they're dealing with. So my recommendation is really that we have civilians. If we can't have civilians and we do hire more officers, then I would recommend that officers who do respond are not uniformed officers, or not in the way that most beat officers, I will call them, and I hope that term is appropriate, are uniformed, where it's very sometimes very intimidating to people. So I wanted to recommend that we do one of those two things. And in terms of the civilian police academy, the language says we could include the reintroduction. And I'd like to say, if we could change that language, that we will include the reintroduction of the civilian police academy. Again, I've been through it. I think that it adds a lot of understanding from the public about what police officers' job is on a day-to-day basis. And I wanted to talk more about the results of the survey. Unfortunately, I received them late in the afternoon and didn't really have a lot of time to take a look at them. So I'm not prepared to do that right now. And I did want to ask a question about, I noticed in there it said part-time officer training. Part-time training officers. So are training officers only part-time?
No, we have one full-time sergeant that oversees the whole training unit. Actually answers to me. And within that, we have a number of officers that are part-time trainers, and each one has a little bit of a specialty. One might be a firearms, some might be firearms, some might be domestic violence instructors, or, you know, someone along those lines. So we have many part-time officers that we get certified in different areas, and they apply to training.
So part-time in the sense that they're only work part-time, or they only do part-time training?
I'm sorry, they're full-time officers with a part-time caveat of training, so.
Okay, all right, that's, I need to get that clarity.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no
And
problem.
If I could also back up just a little bit, I apologize for not getting a Zone 5 training. I just made myself another note. And I'll write it on my forehead
okay.
tonight, so I see it in the mirror when I look in the morning, but I'll get you something tomorrow.
That's all right. We're all very busy. I clearly understand, definitely. So we had also talked about crime prevention through environmental design, and I don't see it anywhere in here. And unless they put it under the other name, which I can't remember exactly what it was at this point. So anywhere, are we talking about crime prevention through environmental design in terms of this, Chief?
Well, we currently deploy that now, so that we didn't put it in here because it's something that we currently do already.
Okay. Okay. All right. I didn't know if it was something we should add because we are getting so much so many developments, especially in lower income communities, that might be something to make sure that that when people come to develop, that's something that's included in their development. And I think my final question is really for Mr. Mudavaren, at least my final right now. So we had said that people are able to submit additional questions or concerns, but how we do that if today is the day that the city council is discussing that? So I just want to bring that forward and see, because I know that people are listening and questioning, because I've received questions myself on how that happens.
Well, we have been receiving emails through the weekend today. So those emails will be part of the record and provide to all city council members for review. And if there's anything out of that, it can be discussed at these meetings.
And today's the final day for people to submit things?
Well, I wouldn't say the final day. I mean, we have not drafted the final report as of yet. We're discussing the stuff here.
Okay.
So I'm not sure the timeline of us getting the final report. It might happen in the next couple of days.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Patrick.
Yes, thanks. I mean, my questions were more, I guess, a little bit general. I mean, the question that I had about communication somewhat goes with the transparency issue that was raised, because one of the things that I think that we heard about through the different months of the process was it seemed clear, and then I think in the survey as well, that folks weren't necessarily aware of everything that is happening in the police department, and you know, the positive stuff, the statistics, the data analysis, etc. So one of my questions was, what can we do to increase that visibility from a sort of public relations standpoint? And then a follow-up question to that would be then who would be the staff person within the police department that basically would be charged with, you know, media releases or those types of things, or the person that is helping either the two members of the committee who wanted to host some community events, or if, you know, when the police themselves are hosting community events, like, what's the staffing look like in terms of that community visibility and public relations? So that that was one section that I had questions on, just around communication. So I don't know if for the assistant chief wants to talk about that.
If I could maybe address that more generally, I think we've tried to internally, and Heather Epson has been kind of spearheading that, putting out a monthly report which summarizes a lot of the things that are happening within the city. And what I don't want to do, and it's kind of a fine line where we're generating so much more information, you know, whether it's garbage collection, things we're doing in development. And when you put it out, I don't want it to become white noise. And so if you go to the city's website, you go to the site map and you look at all the things that we have information up there on, it's good, it's appropriate, and we want to expand that. And so some of this as we go forward, I look to have, people or sometimes broken down into neighborhoods because there are different concerns in different neighborhoods. What are they looking for? Are they looking for information on burglaries? Are they looking to just see what our staffing levels are for patrol? And some of it, going through things raising questions about parking tickets, where some people will call and complain there's cars that are parked where they shouldn't be. They write the tickets, and other people complain, well, I got a parking ticket. It's how do we balance that and provide a good overview? And the other thing, as Chief Sieber pointed out, is the large numbers of FOIL requests that the police department receives and the city as a whole receives. I would prefer not to have to deal with those in terms of FOIL requests, which is a formal process, that we would just have the information up there so that people could go to the city website, look in the development department, look in the police department, look in the fire department, and be able to access that information. In a lot of it, it's discretionary from what I put up there, or what the management side of it does. But it's also the city council from a policy perspective can say, you want more information on economic development. You want more information on where we're responding to fires, or what are we doing with a certain category of crime? What's the follow-up on burglaries or car larcenies? And so it's, again, maybe you should start using this term more often. It's a dynamic process where just the sending this into the governor at his request, it's not the be-all end-all. For this to be successful, for us to continue the good things that we're doing within the community, we have to look at ways to build on our past success and address any of those areas that may be deemed to be deficient.
Ms. Patrick, are you done?
Well, that was the communication piece. I just feel that it seemed to me over the course of the last several months that there was misinformation. There was necessarily folks just maybe aren't aware that there's information on the website. So I just think that we need to, continue. That could be me as a PR and marketing person, but that we have to keep making sure that we are getting the word out there to folks, even about where they can find information on the city's website. Because I think that seemed to be something that folks wanted as we went through our various community meetings. I think that one, I had some questions or some comments regarding the mental health issues. Some of it was discussed by Ms. Porterfield. In terms of our staffing, one of the things that I think we heard repeatedly over the last several months was this idea of mental health professionals that would be, I know we work in partnership with several community agencies, but I wanted to get the chief's ideas about whether, hiring mental health professionals who actually would work on these police department staff might help as they respond to certain calls. So I just wanted to get that perspective out there, because it was definitely something we talked about quite a bit with several of the groups. And along with that, part of the report was around the use of cutting back on sending out police officers for intimidation purposes. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about, whether mental health professionals could be used in those circumstances where they might be going into homes where, other domestic issues are there, and those folks would be well trained to do that. And then the other piece, and that's my last piece on mental health, was just around, again, the use of the telehealth types of things that we know the fire department's using. So all of that was just under the umbrella of mental health. And if folks could speak to that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a lot of questions around one topic, which I think is probably the biggest reason why we need to have further discussions about this. I don't think anybody would disagree that mental health professionals are the best people to be out there delivering that level of service. But one of the things that we all need to keep in mind, and maybe I'll just put it out there for our corporation council, is liability on the city. Should a mental health professional go out there and they get injured in a situation, or the person that they're delivering the level of service to injure somebody else, is that going to be an adequate response by the city? Will we run into a situation where we send out mental health professionals and also have to send out a police officer to keep them safe? Or will mental health professionals now have to start being trained more like police officers so that when they're out there doing it? So there's just a lot that are going into this conversation about this that that we need to probably have. I'd be remiss if I did not point out that our police officers here in Schenectady are trained very well in dealing with people with mental health disorders. We have officers that work for us that provide that training at Zone 5. And everybody likes to point out the one or two situations where there's a failure, but we don't talk about how many situations that we deal with every single day where officers find successes in dealing with people with mental health issues, where we get them the help that they need, and then we move on with our day. So what we have found is that by having many of these calls that we get sent on, ones that now Director Spawn is helping us with by diverting them to Northern Rivers, and other ones that we know that we can divert, like if somebody just needs a ride to the hospital because they didn't take their meds. If we could lose those calls for service and send different people to those lower level ones, it'll leave our officers more time in their day to do community policing type of activities, to be out walking beats and do things that people actually want to see them doing. So that's kind of where our thought process has been with doing that. But you do run into the situation. This is why we put in our recommendations to have a little bit more specialized training, because even with harm reduction or cultural awareness, which we do provide on a generic basis here, it's always good to have that one or two persons that if an officer gets stumped, they know they can call because they're the specialist. They've had that extra level of training. We do that with tactics. All of our officers are trained in tactics, but if they run into a really serious situation, there's those one or two officers that they know are working that they're going to call, say, "Come on over here, I got a situation." So I think that at the end of what we have to really all agree on with these recommendations is something that we need to spend a little bit more time and bring more professionals into this conversation about.
Thanks. And I think that goes back to what you all are saying about this being a dynamic process that will continue past, the April 1st deadline. So thanks. Thank you for that. And that's really those are the majority of the questions that I had. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a few recommendations I would like to submit for consideration. And the mayor or the police chief can address this one. With regards to the steering committee, I would like to see the steering committees still be active. The reason for it to be active is that this committee will further discussion on the recommendation and the implementation. Is that something that we can do, Mayor or police chief?
We talked about it at the last meeting, and there's some people who stepped up to volunteer. So I think probably the best way to say we'd look to restructure it and assign some different responsibilities as we start to focus on some of the areas that we'd like to make changes or improvements. So I'd say yes with quotes around it, Mr. President.
Yeah, it will be beneficial because we will have the community engaged, around this situation to discuss this, review what is being implemented, and to further the discussion as we move along and to get this off the ground. So that's one of my recommendations to be added, and that's one I hope that it can be. The other recommendation I have, the diversity, inclusion, and recruitment. Chief, I know Mr.
Councilman,
Gardner is
before
working on
we-
a he's working on a diversity plan. Number 9, is it possible that we can add a sentence or two to talk about when this plan is completed and approved by you and City Council and the Mayor, that we can work to implement the diversity plan from Mr. Gardner?
Yes, we could do that. I haven't checked with Mr. Gardner to see where he's at with that, but I would think that we should be able to have something done within 30 days.
I did speak with him last week, last Thursday, I believe. We had a conversation about having some meetings either this week or early next to kind of formalize some kind of plan, so.
Yeah, I spoke with him last week or so also, and he's working on it. I know it's a detailed plan, but it will have to have a lot of stakeholders in it. So I'm not rushing on it, but I just wanted to make sure that we make note of it. Now, when it's completed and approved, we need to implement it under number 9.
Yeah, and Mr.
Go ahead.
Motiver, and also the issues we're dealing with in terms of staffing and recruitment in the police department are very similar to the issues we have in the police or in the fire department in other city components. And so I look at it, yes, we have to deal with something specifically tonight with the police department, but I don't want to do it so it's too focused and we miss opportunities to create appropriate recruitment in other civil service jobs, mainly the fire department.
And Mr. Motivaran, if I could just add to that particular.
We'll look at the plan when it comes out. I mean, all of us
Yes.
will have an opportunity to look at the plan and see what is in there. And if the things that we feel comfortable with, we can remove it and move forward with what we think we can achieve.
Yes.
Go, Ms. Porterfield.
Yes, and Mr. Motivaran, on the particular topic, I'd like to add that I would like to make sure that when we talk about this, we're not just talking about sworn officers, but we're also talking about civilians who are employed at the police department, that we increase the diversity there as well.
Absolutely. I think that's what the plan is. My next recommendation, I know this was taught among the community meetings and outreach, the Police Athletic League, but I think we recently changed that to the Public Safety League to include the fire department. Under community engagement, is this something that we can put in there so that we can have the police officer and the fire department officers implement this program? Because I think it was widely discussed and it's something that the community is looking forward for.
Yes, we can do that. As a matter of fact, we've already had I was actually doing it already. We've had a conversation and an idea that that we're looking at right now, but we could definitely add that.
Yeah, it would be beneficial. I mean, because the community will see this report, the final report, and know that we have listened to them and we're going to do something with regards to this Public Safety League. My final recommendation, and Ms. Porterfield and Ms. Patrick touch on this topic, mental health. This is a widely discussed topic regarding the steering committee meeting. I mean, we talk about it at large, but how do we get this program and put the help out there? We need funding. We need to look at under community health initiative, where we can able to say, okay, look at the CDBG funding and look at local organization or hospitals that is providing local service to our residents, and able to fund program that is already in place so that we can provide help to these people who are seeking help. Mayor McCarthy, would you able to touch on that for me a little in terms of CDBG funding?
I agree with you, Mr. Motivaran, in terms of reaching out to other partners and to be able to leverage what dollars we have to adequately provide the appropriate response to the situations that today only police are responding to. So yeah, I look forward to working with you and making that happen.
Yeah, and this would be beneficial to both the police department. It will take away, some of the burden from the police department by having help, by providing funding to this organization. They will be open to treat these persons and help to take out the burden that is already on the police department and have these agencies accessible at the police department or any official can refer these personnel. That is all I have, those 4 recommendations, and I hope that these can be added. There are minor changes, nothing of a major changes, and this was widely discussed at most of the meetings that we had. Is there anyone else who would like to discuss anything further?
Yes, Mr. Mudavaren?
Please proceed.
Actually, the chief mentioned this and when he talked about whether there were any studies or anything done on what's happening now in terms of bias or discrimination. And he said, as I understood, he said that's not being done right now. So I would recommend that based on that we actually put in part of that our recommendations that be done, because if we want to know whether we're improving, we need to know what our starting point is. So I would recommend that we have that put in there. And there was one more. Okay. Nope, I think that was it.
Are we all good with our points and recommendation, question being answered? So how do we move forward from here? There are a lot of recommendations, a lot of things need to be worked on. May I suggest that we have a special Public Safety Committee meeting this Friday to address all these recommendations and then arrive at our final documentation for Monday?
I would certainly support that, because I don't think that there were a lot of, there were some recommendations and a lot of questions. So I would agree that we would need to see how they're put into the document as it sits, and then go forward from there. And in addition to that, as you said, the people have sent emails, which we did not discuss tonight. And so we want to make sure that we review those as well as we're making these final recommendations. So I think most of them were about one topic. However, if there's others, we just want to make sure we do that. And because I don't think we've been really clear with people when the final time we're going to stop accepting suggestions, et cetera, and so on. So I think if we're going to be moving forward next Monday, that we definitely need to have another meeting prior to that to make sure we are 100%. But I guess my only question with that becomes, how do we deliver to the public our final document, or is that not part of the process prior to us voting on it?
Well, the reason for us to meet again is that we'll discuss whatever recommendation we have put forward here into this new draft. We discuss it at a public committee meeting, and we arrive at a conclusion, and that document will be posted online Friday.
Okay. And that will include
I think it's not a lot of changes, it's minor changes, and it's discussed at a public here. So whatever was discussed here, some will be implemented into this report.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Mudavaren, are you looking to have the city clerk's staff make those changes? Or are you looking to have the law department or the police department? I'm just looking at staffing, depending on what time you hold the meeting on Friday.
I was going to suggest that it goes back to you, Mr. Mayor, and police chief. And I would ask my colleagues, based on any recommendations or changes, to submit the changes
in writing
by tomorrow, end of business tomorrow, so that these can be worked on.
Well, when you say worked on, I'd like you to vote on recommendations as the normal process. This is a resolution going before the council. So that if you're going to have a meeting, I would prefer, and I think staff would prefer, you do it on Thursday, so that I'm not holding people here on a Friday night in what would be a less than productive time frame, then I gotta get it posted online for the public to view over the weekend and you to vote on it on Monday.
Yeah, I don't have a problem doing it on Thursday, but do we have the time frame there? Mr. Colden, are we good in terms of sending out a press release and adequate timing?
You
I
don't-
think part of that's, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
It's, if I can make a suggestion drawing on my experience of once upon a time being a council president or committee chair, you don't have to adjourn your meeting tonight. You could recess it to whatever time you like.
Oh.
That bypasses the public notice. We have, the newspapers are participating in this meeting. And I'm sure that they will give adequate coverage to whatever the decision is made.
Okay.
So then, yeah, so then we can recess the public here, public safety committee, and then reconvene Thursday. If that is okay with my colleagues.
I would like to know what time you're thinking. I mean, maybe like 4 o'clock or 3:30 or
5:30?
5:30?
Mm-hmm. That's fine.
I would need to have a hard stop.
Enough?
I'd need to have a hard stop on that. So as long as that was the case.
5:30 is okay with you, Thursday?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Palomini, are you okay with Thursday, 5:30, for us to reconvene?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Zaluski, Wilsonas?
Yes.
Yeah. So I will ask my colleagues to please submit any change or anything that you would like, and that can be worked on, and I will get that to the mayor and Chief Clifford, since they are the owners for this document, and they can get that those changes in. So by end of day tomorrow, I will like those recommendations to be submitted. Are there any other discussion on this item?
No.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next item, and this is just a reminder for the public hearing on March 22nd. There's nothing we need to do here. It's just a reminder to the public that this will be a public hearing amending Chapter 93 of the Code of the City of Schenectady, and that will be on March 22nd. Are there any other business for public safety?
I just, may I say one thing?
Oh, please. Go ahead, proceed.
Section 9322, and this ties in with our prior discussion. One of your suggestions was to continue the steering committee. I would point out that one of the amendments to the police review board is that the advisory committee be resurrected to come up with suggestions. So if you're going to do one, you don't need to do the other. So if you're going to amend 93-22, I don't think you need to continue the steering committee. Who's on that advisory committee, but it sounds like the advisory committee is going to be what the continuation of the steering committee is. Just food for thought if you're thinking about it.
So I can just clarify. Sure, I would clarify because I'm the one who asked for the advisory committee for the Civilian Police Review Board to be reinstated. So the advisory committee for the CPRB is only for the CPRB. And but the steering committee that we're talking about is it's not maybe the existing members, but a similar kind of structure that continually looks at policing overall, not just the CPRB, but the entire process, to make sure the things that we say that we're going to do as of April 1st, that the steering committee looks at it and say, where are we? You know, are we meeting this goal? You know, what do we need to do differently? So it really is two different things.
Okay, I thought the CPRB was also charged with reviewing policies and procedures of the police department as well as reviewing discipline. I thought they'd be serving the same purpose.
They don't review the policies and procedures. They can recommend, but they don't review the policies and procedures. They just they could recommend something to help them do their job better. So it really would be two different entities.
Okay.
Thank you. May I have a motion to recess public safety?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are recessed.
Okay, I want to open city development and planning, and the first item on the agenda is just a reminder for the public hearing that's going to be on the properties for McClellan and Bradley Street for the zoning changes. And that's going to be on Monday. So that's just a reminder for the public hearing. The next item on the agenda is the reappointment of Richard Russo to the Land Bank, Capital Region Land Bank. And I do believe that Mr. Russo is on the line with us, and he was going to give us a quick update. He's done a fantastic job on the land bank. We've moved many derelict, distressed properties, and we've made parks, and we've revitalized property, and it's all because of the partnership between the land bank, the city, the county, and Metroplex. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Russo right now, and I do believe he has a couple of things up on the screen for us to view. So Rich, go ahead.
I do. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you. I just want to thank Council President Munavaran, City Council members, Mayor McCarthy, Commissioner Devine, Common Council, and members of the public who are listening. I appreciate the opportunity to stand before you again today to ask for your support in reappointing me as chairman of the Land Bank. We did put together a very brief slide demonstration, but I did want to just kind of give a brief history lesson. We started this initiative in 2013. We took over $8 million in Attorney General grant funds that were clawed back from predatory lending practices from the large banks who had some significant impact in the way that our communities were negatively impacted during the mortgage crisis, and created some of this blight and some of this decay that we're faced with. And over the last almost 9 years now, we have, in partnership with the city, the county, the city of Amsterdam, but most importantly, right here in our own community, done over 200 demolitions in which we've taken capacity out of our community, excess capacity that was blighted and or dangerous to our citizens in our neighborhoods, and really put our shoulder into the sled of neighborhood revitalization and bringing back good housing stock, and or leveraging that $8 million into, as you can see in the slide, almost $96 million in additional funding, whether that was through direct investment by developers or direct investment through other grant funds. We have worked with home leasing development, Renaissance Square in the Eastern Avenue corridor. That's a $19 million investment. Habitat has done a tremendous number of projects, or we've done a tremendous number of projects with them. Carey Street comes to mind, where we've helped demolish and rebuild a number of units there. Prospect with the social enterprise and training. The Seat Center has been really impactful in our community, and we've helped them to move the ball. B&I under the new leadership of Janica, and it's a consolidated fashion. So we've done a lot of work with a lot of different community partners in which we've really made a difference. And we want to continue to make a difference. Go ahead and move the slide if you want. I'll go to the next slide rather. St. Mary's School, for all of that, for those of you who don't know, up again in the Eastern Avenue corridor, a $19 million investment, as I just spoke of. This is a significant renovation in which a dilapidated school and parcel in the corner of Eastern was in complete decay. It was dangerous. There was pigeons living in the place. It was going to fall down on someone. And these guys, if you want to go to the next slide, home leasing development has made this place amazing. It's beautiful and it's transformative for the neighborhood. And so when I think about some of the projects that we've worked on over the years, that we've made transformative difference in our neighborhoods, we've focused on the corridors, whether it's Eastern Avenue or up into Mount Pleasant on Crane Street. We have done a significant amount of work up into Albany Street, where we've taken down old, dilapidated, unsafe buildings and paved the way or created the opportunity for new development to come in. So you've got community builders on Albany Street doing a $44 million, I think it's 80 plus units of affordable housing. You've got, we took down Chubby's. We did the demolition for Chubby's, paving the way for another branch of our tremendous library system, Chubby's, which was, I think, well over 500 police calls in its final year and well known for some behaviors that we just don't want to have in our neighborhoods. So as I've said to the mayor, and I appreciate his continued support, I've said that this was a tool. The land bank is a tool. We've worked very hard to keep that tool sharp through budget funding, through the AG and or through grant funds, Neighbors for Neighbors, our enterprise and list partners who have created value for us, helped us to get more grant dollars. We've worked hard to keep the tool sharp, and we'll continue to do that. And I look forward to continuing to lead the way as chairman of the land bank. I've got a tremendous board. I've got a tremendous community that I'm proud to serve in many capacities. If you go to the next slide, you can see that our latest project here, with your support, I want to thank you again, on Barrett Street. We continue to remove the worst of the worst, as Mayor McCarthy always says, and as we continue to build back better, again, to take another phrase from the mayor's playbook, I'm looking forward to leading, helping continue the work that we've done, that we've started, and I look forward to additional years of success in our community. So I appreciate the support of council. I will continue to work hard to drive our board to support our communities, to support our revitalization, and to do the hard work that it takes to revitalize our entire city, county, and neighbors in Amsterdam.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the hard work you've done. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Russo?
Ms. Lewski-Walzunas?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Porterfield.
Yes, because I just want to be clear on actually what we're doing tonight. It said to reappoint you to the land bank. So the position of chair, that's not really decided by, we appoint you the chair, or is that decided by the members of the land bank board?
It's you've appointed me. I serve at the pleasure of City Council and the mayor as chairman over the land bank.
Okay, so we're appointing you to the chairmanship, not just the land bank itself.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. Any other questions?
I'm happy to move that we reappoint Mr. Russo as the chair of the Capital Region Land Bank once again, and I appreciate everything that you and the land bank do, Rich, so thanks for all your work.
Thank you, Councilman Patrick.
So thank you, and I will happily second that. And all in favor?
Aye.
So it does pass. So thank you for your service, Mr. Russo, and we look forward to hearing more fantastic things coming from the land bank.
I appreciate council's support. I look forward to continuing to serve. Thank you so much. I'm happy to stay on and close out the meeting with you.
All righty, thank you. Well, the next items on the agenda, I believe all need to be done in an executive session because they are contracts. And I believe we need to go into executive session, correct, Mr. Colden?
That's correct, Ms. Zaluski-Wells-Innes.
All righty, so I'll entertain a motion to go in executive session.
So moved, I put my mute on instead of off.
Okay,
Sorry.
I will second that and we will go into executive session. Let's see on the next. So thank you.
Okay.